Hey, Pablo with Meditation Amsterdam, and today we are going to talk about the movie theater analogy for explaining enlightenment. It is one that I have read about and heard about many times, and it's not until I would say the last week or two when, thanks to the progressive shift in identity that happens as you meditate more and more, this analogy really landed in my head, and I wanted to make a video about it and explain what it means, what it stands for. Now, as usual, we're going to make use of our famous whiteboard, and in order to illustrate the analogy, we begin with our usual individual, the person, right? Which is right here. And that person, as always, is made up of a body. It's made up of a mind that has these ideas, right? And they also have feelings or emotions right here. And this person lives surrounded by other people and also a world, which is going to be represented by a happy tree over here, as Bob Ross would say. So there we go. All right, that's our starting point. Now, so in order to kind of make this into a coherent story, you can imagine that the person starts as a little child and develops in the world, learns how to do things and learns what is important, what is the idea of success, what is the idea of creating a good life for yourself, and all this kind of good stuff. So they start to go out there and they acquire a series of beliefs, a personal history, and they start to kind of define themselves by all that. Now, there's a very common stage or phenomenon which takes place in I think it's a Western modern society phenomenon. I've never heard whether tribes people experiment any of this. I bet you the answer would be kind of no. And it is called middle-age crisis. And middle-age crisis seems to be some sort of fork in the road in which the individual has hit a certain point in which they start to question what it's all about. Maybe they've managed to succeed, but it doesn't make them too happy anymore. Maybe they are in a kind of living what would on paper seem as a mediocre life, and they realize that things are not really going to progress much further than that, right? It could be any kind of reason, but there's a certain void that starts to be felt, in which the things that were supposed to make you happy, like all these objects, like I don't know, a cool car that goes really fast, right? Or money or success and fame and any of those kind of things, they are simply not fulfilling. At this point, several things could happen. Either the person doubles down and say, well, I thought this was a cool car, but it's really the next one that's going to make me really happy, and they double down and they try to keep chasing those kind of things. Sometimes depression can set in, and sometimes a deeper search begins, which you could call the spiritual search. And that's when things start to become a little bit interesting, right? Now, assuming that this person starts to follow indeed a spiritual search, they would start to go into potentially personal improvement or things of that kind, or they would engage in a number of practices that are aimed at filling that sense of something missing in themselves. So they would engage in, I don't know, meditation or whatever, and they would sit under this tree, and be completely still, and hope that, just like the Buddha, they would be enlightened under the Bodhi tree. But usually nothing really works. Nothing ever happens for that person. And they hear things. They hear things that don't seem to really add up. One of them is, they say that listen, you don't really need to do anything because you are already the Buddha. So somewhere here deep inside, there's already, there's already the Buddha in there shining, right? And so all this song and dance that you're doing is really useless. You can't really get there. You're already there. They also hear things like, the person can never really experience enlightenment because it is on such a different level. It's such a thing out there that whatever ideas you may have about it are all completely false. And that puts everyone who decides to, stop chasing materialistic things and really takes spirituality seriously, it puts you in a bind because then you don't know what to do. Because you say, well, if I can think my way there or practice or act my way there, and I'm already supposed to be there, but I can't really feel it and I'm miserable, then, you just throw your arms up in the air and you go, well, then it's anybody's guess what I'm supposed to do, right? But nonetheless, they keep sort of the practices going little by little, and then a little opening starts to happen. And the challenge that this individual here has is that it is dealing. The individual itself is a false construct, except it doesn't know it, right? And the idea that the individual can get enlightened is therefore also a false construct because it's the idea created by a false entity, a non-entity, rather. Now, that doesn't help us either, except if we paint a bit of a different picture that complements this supposed starting point. See, this starting point of the individual trying to get enlightened is not really where you're starting from. It just appears to be that way. So let's paint a bit of a broader picture and show you what's actually happening. See, what is actually happening is that everything here is happening in a screen, like a movie screen. Yeah. Now, this screen here, so this guy here is the individual, so we're going to call him the I, right? The individual, right here. So this is I. The screen, which is this green screen over here, which is kind of like a movie screen or a projector screen. Yeah. This one is consciousness. Okay. So what is really happening is that all of these things that appear to be, permanent and real, like our body and our mind and the world, they are really all events that are taking place in a screen called consciousness. Very good. And so that's where all these things like, ideas like the Matrix, right? Like the Matrix, everything is like, just a show of light. That's where they come in. Now, I could tell you that, but it still wouldn't help you a lot because you say, well, that's all great. It's all great to know that it's all fake, that it's all really a movie. And that me being miserable or me being in pain or feeling like there's something missing in my life is part of the movie, right? Seems like kind of relevant information, except it doesn't really help me either, right? Because, it's still a crappy movie and I would rather be seeing a happy movie. Those are the kind of things that the individual is thinking when he's thinking of getting to Buddhahood or, either through practices or understanding things. But this is the next step, right? So already here we've grown a little bit to understand that everything around us is kind of a show of light, which is happening in consciousness. But there's still one additional step missing, which is that for that movie to be playing in consciousness, there needs to be a light being projected onto it, right? And that's when the really important point comes in, which is that you have this incredibly powerful and in fact all powerful. Light over here, boom, like this massive thing, which is projecting light in this direction, and as it hits the screen of consciousness, all this show begins. And this light is the light of awareness. Boom. Yeah. And this is where things get really interesting, because they explain what the project is really about. You see, when awareness finds an individual that possesses consciousness, it sort of brings it to life, and it brings out to life a world all around it. So awareness is really the light that is creating the entire show, including consciousness and including the person. But see, the person doesn't know that. And the reason the person doesn't know that is because the person, the individual, is an actor in the movie. So think about it. When you go watch a movie, what are the chances that one of the actors projected on the screen would suddenly stop in the middle of the movie and realize that it is made of light? It's impossible. It is not possible for the actor being projected on the screen of a movie, it's not even the actor, it's the character, to realize that it's made of light. It can't. It is a reality that is happening on an order. It is an order of reality that it cannot capture. Cannot, right? It's above it. It's completely outside of its purview of understanding. For that same reason, the individual can never become enlightened, no matter what it does, no matter what it thinks, no matter what it practices, no matter what it reads. It cannot. This individual here cannot realize itself as awareness. Right? What does that mean in terms of our spiritual path in our practice? Well, it means that as an individual we are screwed, but that doesn't mean that we're stuck, because what's happening is the other way around. What is happening is awareness typically flows this way. It hits consciousness and it gets hypnotized by this whole show of being an individual playing in a world. But if through a different use of itself, awareness uses this reflection of itself, this mirror called consciousness, and the individual that it apparently is, to instead of looking at the light show of the world and the me and my body or whatever, and uses the mirror to instead observe itself, now we're onto something. Yeah. Now we're onto something, and it explains why what enlightenment takes place, but never to the individual. Enlightenment only happens to awareness itself. In other words, enlightenment is not the person becoming the Buddha, but it is the Buddha remembering who it is. So that awareness, which shines on the mirror of consciousness and for a while mistakes itself and becomes enmeshed with a sense of individuality, which is concrete, and a sense of separateness from the world, it all of a sudden, through a certain use of the individual vehicle, uses the individual and the world as a mirror to remember itself. So that, and that explains the two pickles or the two questions that I was describing in the beginning. That explains how the individual doesn't become enlightened, but rather it is awareness that was always enlightened. In other words, you are already the Buddha, you just don't remember it. And that's how it works, as a matter of fact, right? So that's essentially the path. Now, How does meditation play a role in all this? In other words, how can awareness use the individual mind-body vehicle to remember itself, so that this mirror is effective? So to use the mirror of consciousness effectively. And the answer, of course, is that meditation, or let me take a step back. The answer is that in order for a movie to be seen as light, it's better if the movie stands still. That's the answer. So what happens is awareness is very transparent and it is very aware, obviously, right? So whenever it hits consciousness, all this movement begins due to desire and mimetic and genetic memory. Things start to just move. And as long as things are moving a lot over here, it makes the mirror of consciousness kind of dirty. It's a poor reflector of awareness. And the more movement there is in the movie of life, the more thinking is going in your head, the more you are distracted with your sense perceptions, the more you are hypnotized by the movie, because you are hypnotized by the patterns created in form. Now, if those patterns come to a standstill, then it becomes very clear that this mirror becomes super transparent, and that everything you are looking at is light. Which light? The light of awareness, right? So to the degree that the individual brain comes to a standstill and the world and the senses are withdrawn, that freezes, it does a freeze frame of the image. And you can imagine yourself, if you're in a movie theater, or say that you're watching a movie on the internet, right? Suddenly the broadband fails on you, the movie freezes, and then it becomes very apparent that you're just looking at a monitor. So maybe you're at the edge of your seat, completely taken in by the movie. The moment the movie freezes, you remember you're just looking at a bunch of pixels on a screen, right? It's the same thing. So the show, right? The show of light that consciousness is exposed for it pretends to be reality, but you can poke holes through it when you freeze it, and it is exposed to be just this pixelated cinematographic experience. Now, when you start to see the pixels and you start to freeze the frame, the cinematographic nature of consciousness is frozen, and you can now start seeing through it, and you go, hang on a second, this is not reality, this is just a show of light. And it is a show of this light. And just in the same way that when the movie freezes due to the broadband, you see the pixels on the screen, you realize it's a screen, you also remember yourself. And in this case, awareness remembers itself. Now, the interesting thing about it is this realization can dawn if you just do the right things. And you can therefore become an awakened individual, or attain a certain degree of enlightenment. But for full enlightenment to happen, the screen needs to become frozen for enough period of time so that you don't get back in this direction again, or so that the pull in this direction doesn't prevent you from jumping back and forth at will. In order for that to happen, awareness needs to kind of colonize everything. It needs to colonize your thoughts, it needs to colonize your emotions, it needs to colonize your body and your very sense of individuality, and it needs to colonize all your perceptions in the world, right? So that the more you think of things or of yourself, or feel your body, or feel emotions, or look at things out there in the world while retaining this sense of identity as opposed to this one, the more the entire mirror of consciousness becomes colonized and illuminated by awareness. And when you have colonized it 100%, then you can claim to be fully enlightened, fully realized as yourself. When that happens, say that you start to observe your thoughts very, very closely while retaining your sense of awareness, then all your thoughts become awareness. Yeah. So now it becomes like this. Say that you do the same with your emotions, right? Then your emotions become the light of awareness, right? Say that you start to do the same with your body and your very sense of identity, right? Then you become also an identity that is based on the light of awareness as opposed to a mind and body in a foreign world. And if you do the same with your sense perceptions, everything you taste, see, feel is just perceived as yourself in the form of awareness, the world becomes made of light, made of the light of awareness. And when this entire thing has been colonized, then it's almost as if your entire experience in consciousness has become made of the light of awareness. And this is when you become fully enlightened. Yeah. So awareness is first realized in an awakening, and then it is used to colonize every aspect of your individual experience until there's even no individual left. There are some Buddhist posters about the Dharmata, in which actually once this happens, the individual itself, it kind of disappears. Everything becomes just this. Everything becomes realized as made up 100% of awareness. And so that's the explanation of why an individual cannot become enlightened, or a person cannot achieve enlightenment, because this fake entity that you used to think you were can never move in this direction. There is no such thing. That move is not available to it. The mind cannot even understand what that means. And that is why we also say that you have always been already the Buddha, but because the light of awareness got enmeshed and identified with this individual and hypnotized by its own reflection in the mirror of consciousness, it forgets itself until through certain acquaintances, practices, study, it makes the trip back and it uses all these things as a mirror instead, and then colonizes all of them. That it becomes that it remembers itself. So it's a job of remembering, in a sense. And at some point, every experience is used as a vehicle for remembering yourself. Well, so that's that. That's the story about the movie analogy. I think it makes a hell of a lot of sense, and it makes life very, very interesting when you start to recite more here, and when you begin to colonize all these aspects, because it also has a purifying effect. It has a loving effect towards yourself. Your thoughts become more neutral, so do your emotions, and so do your attitudes towards the rest of the world. Hope that helps, and I'll be back with more videos pretty soon. Cheerio.